851. Go ahead and disregard the chance. We got him at San Jacinto Pacific. Out there.
A car accident left one person dead and a family in mourning. At first, it looked like the driver's alcohol consumption was the cause. But a closer look revealed a common weed found in an uncommon place, leading investigators to wonder, was it really an accident? Peter and Patty Willasik lived in the small town of Guilford in upstate New York.
Guilford's a beautiful, quiet community. It's a historic community, just a small hamlet. They have the lake as their main attraction. They have a beautiful lake. There's a lot of summer homes on it. But we have a lot of hunting land for deer hunting.
The Wilasiks were well-liked in Guilford. Peter owned one of the local bars. Patty worked as a nurse at a local hospital.
She got a lot of joy from that. Gave her a great sense of worth.
The only trouble spot seemed to be several citations Patty received for driving while intoxicated.
On a scale of 1 to 10, she would be a 9. I mean, her one downfall, her one flaw was alcoholism. And that's it. Other than that, she was perfect.
She did her fair share of partying and she did have her problems, but she was big enough and a strong enough person to try to persevere from them by going to school and getting her, degree.
On April 3rd, 2002, Patty worked the hospital's 3 to 11 shift. When she came home, Peter was there, but the children were not.
Where are the kids? Somehow that night, my wife neglected or forgot to pick up our children at the babysitter.
He described it as being a mistake or miscommunication. Obviously, when she got there, she thought that Mr. Willasik was going to pick them up. He thought she was.
They got into their truck and headed for the babysitter's house. Along the way, Patty tried to throw her cigarette out of the window.
The cigarette had come back into the cab of the truck. Both their attention was distracted towards the window where the cigarette should have went.
When they looked up, there was a deer in the road. Patty swerved, lost control of the truck, and plunged into the lake. Peter said he was unable to get his wife out of the truck.
But I can't hold on to her. A lot of days I wish I'd been a lot stronger. I wish I could have got her up to the top.
Peter ran to a nearby home for help. Divers pulled Patty's body from the bottom of the freezing cold lake, and she was rushed by ambulance to the same hospital where she worked, but doctors were unable to resuscitate her.
I didn't want to live anymore myself. I couldn't picture going on anymore in life without her. I couldn't. And there's reasons, that I like to think it was either her or God speaking to me that, I didn't go further with what I was planning on joining her.
Toxicology tests showed Patty had a blood alcohol level of 0.05, which was under the legal limit.
She had imbibed some alcoholic beverages, and for a woman of her size, probably 2 or 3 drinks in the previous hour or two.
As with most fatal accidents, local officials conducted an accident investigation, which raised more questions than it answered. Dr. James Terzian performed the autopsy on 35-year-old Patty Willasik the day after the fatal accident.
She had a number of abrasions and contusions, which are scrapes and bruises, on the face, on the undersurface of the upper lip, on the shoulder regions. Those were the superficial injuries. She also had petechial hemorrhages or microhemorrhages on the surfaces of her lungs.
These hemorrhages can result from drowning, but there was very little water in Patty's lungs.
One does not have to have water in the lungs to drown, and it's possible to have water in the lungs after one has been deceased and placed in water.
Lab tests confirmed that Patty had been drinking. In his preliminary report, Dr. Terzian identified the cause of death as probable drowning.
I'm left with minor cutaneous injuries, abrasions and contusions, and a person pulled out of water. So that's a drowning until proved otherwise.
There was one other finding. For some unexplained reason, there were seed pods in Patty's hair and on her clothing. The pods were from a common weed called burdock.
They have these little hooks on them which stick to animals or people, and they travel around and then usually get dumped somewhere, and so the plant gets distributed around that way. Finds new waste places to grow.
At the accident scene, investigators found the truck took an unusual route into the water.
Most of the lake is covered by home fronts with garages and houses, and then the area that doesn't have houses or garages or residences has guide rails to prevent somebody going in the lake.
The truck veered into the lake at one of the few places where there was an unobstructed path from the road to the lake. And investigators found no traces of deer in the area.
It's not one where you would generally expect to find a deer. And had they swerved for a deer, you would expect to see some sort of evidence of that, braking, swerving, skidding tires, anything like that.
There were tire impressions from Patty's truck on the shoulder of the right-hand lane and tire impressions on the opposite side of the road in the grass. Accident investigator Richard Cobb connected these impressions, plotted the angle of the turn, and then estimated the speed of the vehicle using a standardized formula.
It's called the critical curve speed formula. It takes into account the grade of the road, the drag factor of the roadway surface, and also the path of the vehicle, meaning the arc that it turned, where you can figure out a speed at which the vehicle either would have been able to make the turn or would have lost control making that turn. V equals velocity. G is for gravity, which is a constant, 32.2. R is for the radius of the R of the curve. And the Greek letter mu is for the coefficient of friction, or the drag factor of the road surface.
This formula revealed that the speed of the Wallace's truck was less than 30 miles per hour, considerably slower than what Peter described. Had the truck been going faster, the interior of the truck would have been damaged.
The interior, you would expect to see maybe damage to the dash, the knee panels from occupants' knees, steering wheel damage, damage to either windshield or side windows. Quite often, unrestrained passengers will hit the rearview mirror, break that off the windshield, or crack the mirror itself. There wasn't any of that present in the vehicle either.
And the physical evidence revealed another contradiction. Peter said he exited the truck through the passenger side door, but when it was brought up from the lake, the passenger side door was locked. He also said Patty was driving and still in the truck when he exited, but her body was found outside of the truck at the bottom of the lake.
Inconsistent with her story. The last one he saw her, she was in the driver's side of the truck.
In the Wallace's home, investigators found Patty's diary. But Patty's diary indicated there were problems.
Never knowing I would be the one to play the outsider. Never realizing you would like her personality better than mine. I honestly never thought you would go elsewhere.
Patty was concerned that Peter and Joyce were meeting behind her back. Peter denies it.
My wife had no reason to be jealous, worried, or whatever.
With Patty dead, the only way she could tell her story was through the autopsy and the forensic evidence. There was one thing that troubled the medical examiner about Patty Wallace's autopsy. Why were there seed pods in her hair and on her clothing?
Well, I was thinking that maybe they attached themselves to her hair and her clothing as she was pulled out of the lake by the emergency personnel. So I asked the police to please go back to the scene, look at the bank where she was removed from the water, and also look underneath the water to see if there was any evidence of this plant material, these burdocks, at the site.
But investigators found no such vegetation anywhere around the lake.
What lady goes out to pick up her kids at the babysitter with burdocks in her hair? It just doesn't happen.
Investigators asked biologist Julian Shepard where burdock plants usually grow.
Typically, you find them growing in old barnyards, around old buildings, abandoned lots, frequently along the edges where people haven't quite mowed, but where there's some open space, and they'll grow up like this.
Dr. Shepard says the plant doesn't grow in water, and there were no burdock plants in the well-tended yards along Guilford Lake. But investigators found all sorts of wild specimens on the Wolasik's property.
He has a yard that was mowed. The yard I would classify as not being very well kept. The officers who did the first one said, there's a lot of burdocks around his property.
Investigators found one burdock plant in the couple's backyard with a broken branch. And there was something foreign on this plant, strands of brown hair. DNA tests revealed the hair was Patty Wolasik's.
Once we had the anatomical findings, we had to go on and correlate them with the situation and the scene findings.
A closer look at the truck revealed another interesting discovery. Strands of Patty's hair were found in the back bed of the truck, and so was her pager. The truck also held several significant clues. The front grille showed no damage whatsoever. But tests conducted by the Michigan State Police showed that a motor vehicle plunging into lake water at 30 miles per hour caused significant damage to the grille. And these studies showed something else. A vehicle the size of a van or truck doesn't automatically sink. It took this vehicle over a minute to sink, others up to 4 minutes.
That said to us, to me, that the average person, if they were conscious after hitting the water, should be able to escape a vehicle prior to it being submerged.
And the more we pried into his story, the more we found out his story didn't match the physical evidence.
The lake's temperature on the night of the accident was 40 degrees. Medical experts said that if Peter had been fully submerged in the water, he would have suffered from acute hypothermia.
April water in New York is not someplace you want to be in, and if you are in it for an amount of time, you're gonna have signs of it.
His core body temperature, from what I understand, should have been a lot lower than it was when he finally received medical treatment.
Peter's body temperature at the hospital was only slightly below normal.
When I saw him, they weren't even running a thermometer in his mouth.
And on Peter's shoes were the same burdocks as those in Patty's hair and on her coat. All of this information, combined with the cuts on the inside of Patty's lip and the petechial hemorrhages in her lungs, led the coroner to conclude that the cause of death was suffocation, not drowning.
And when we put all of this together, it became apparent that she was dead before she went into the lake.
Peter Wolasik denied killing his wife and said he had evidence to prove it.
It's all scientific and medical.
Based on the forensic evidence, prosecutors believe that Patty Wolasik was murdered by her husband, Peter, who tried to make it look like an accident. The life insurance on Patty's life was $300,000.
Money was one of the strong motives for Mr. Wolasik murdering his wife, especially evidenced by the fact that he was on the phone less than 8 hours later trying to collect the insurance proceeds.
Prosecutors believe that Peter left the children with the babysitter so he could be alone with Patty when she came home from work.
Peter had been home from his job at the bar for an hour. According to family members, it would be normal for Peter to pick the kids up and have them home at that time. I'm sure that was part of his plan to make sure the kids weren't at the house when he knew that he was going to commit the homicide.
After Patty had an alcoholic beverage, Peter coaxed her outside, then attacked her. While suffocating her, there was the cross-transfer of Patty's hair onto the burdock plant and the seed pods into her hair. When dragging her body to the truck, Patty's coat picked up more seed pods, and they also attached to Peter's shoes. The forensic evidence suggests the body was placed in the truck bed. Tire impressions show that Peter pulled over onto the right side of the road, slowly steered the truck through the spot without a guardrail down into the lake. But he left both doors locked, and Patty's body was discovered outside the truck. Prosecutors say Peter got into the water briefly, just enough to get himself wet, before running to a nearby home for help.
I guess one of my impressions was just how, in a way, how stupid the case was, I'm afraid. I mean, he made all sorts of blunders.
Peter Walasic was arrested and charged with murder. At the trial, Walasic took the stand in his own defense, and he changed his story.
I'm here for telling a lie. If I didn't lie back then, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
He now admitted that his original story to investigators was a lie. His new story was that Patty was too intoxicated to drive, and that he ordered her to pull over to the side of the road so that he could take the wheel.
Told her to turn around, take the vehicle home. We just turned around. We were still arguing, and in a fit of rage, she lost control of it and put the vehicle in the lake. It was like a road rage.
But there was no evidence that the truck ever turned around. And why turn the truck around when your destination, the babysitter's house, was just down the road?
He was stuck with the evidence the way it was, and his story had to match with the physical evidence that we had. Does it make sense? Absolutely not. Does it defy logic? Absolutely.
And there was no evidence the truck was traveling at a high speed.
Any type of acceleration along the grass should have left torn up grass, the grass pulled up by the roots, burned grass. Had the rear wheels been on the blacktop or in the loose gravelly part between the blacktop and the grass, you would expect to see skid marks or gravel thrown up, that sort of thing, and we weren't able to find any of that either.
Between the reconstruction work and the forensic, it's what really made the case, because obviously his first version, we were able to punch complete holes in it. There was nothing left of his first version, and actually his second version wasn't much better.
Walasic claims that the burdocks in Patty's hair were not from his backyard, but from the lake, and that a scuba diver he hired found proof.
Knowing what the scuba diver said, what he found, what is in his report, my scuba diver, I'm believing now that the burdocks were in the bottom of the lake. And that's how they got on her.
The prosecution's expert said this was impossible.
If it ended up in the water, it would deteriorate, and when it becomes wet, I guess you want to call it the stickiness to your clothing, it doesn't stick like that once it's wet and deteriorate in the water.
The idea that the burdocks had been got from the water was just pretty preposterous.
Prosecutors believe that Peter wanted a new life with his girlfriend, sole custody of his 2 children, and the $300,000 worth of life insurance. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours.
Charging murder in the second degree, how do you find the defendant, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Peter Walasic was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. He continues to maintain his innocence.
They say you're innocent till proven guilty? No. You're guilty till proven innocent, and that still hinges on how much money you have. And everybody's expecting you to prove that you didn't do it.
The forensic evidence in this case turned out to be confession. Every time Mr. Walasic opened up his mouth, he said something that contradicted what the forensic evidence told us about the state of the accident scene, the state of the truck, and the state of Patty Walasic's body.
Of the entire investigation, the presence of the burdocks made this case because it made us look further to see if, in fact, she was dead before she went into the water or not. It was critical in this case. It's a small piece of evidence, and it's not even actually part of the body. but it's what comes along with the body. And that was key in this case.